So, as we go on, hopefully, you know, I talked to a couple of you during the break, and it may not have seemed like it while we were doing it, but we went over that fairly quickly. We really did. All right? Remember that if we did it in an hour and 20 minutes, you have basically 3 times that amount to do the test on Tuesday. All right? And you've got the best resource I can give you is yourself, because you just did that and you've got the code. All right, let's look at Chapter 3. Now, Chapter 3 in the book, which starts on page 77, again, I'm not going to say to you, this is an H1 tag. This is a BR tag. No, if you've got to relearn that, you've got your book here, you've got your book from last year. You say, well, I sold my book. Well, then at least you've got the book here. All right? So what they do in this chapter, if you take a look on the screen here, where is it? This is what they built. All right? First thing to notice when you look at it is there is a frame around the whole thing. You can see the dark colored frame around it. Okay? First thing. Second thing, like we've already done, notice that instead of having a validation summary at the bottom, they now have the messages to the right, like ours are, correct? Third thing that you may or may not have noticed, there are no tables in here. This is all formatted using CSS. All right? So that's first thing. And what we'll get to, and this will be a ways up, but I just want to show it to you, and I think we looked at this the other day, but I want to say it again anyway. When we get to the point, come on, would you, there you go. When we get to that point, we want to bring in the Bootstrap stuff. We want this to be mobilely responsive. All right? I just want to, you know, again, so they show you the interface, okay? And then they mention that after you modify it, you're going to go and add that style sheet. They show you the entire style sheet, okay? It's at the end of the chapter. Or actually, there's a couple of them. They're all in here. All the code is in here, all right? And again, what's a doc type? What's a title? What's a link? You should know that stuff by now, okay? All right. With the ASPX code, if you take a look here, look at what they've changed. They've HTML5'd it, for lack of better words. Students had their first test, as I told you this morning, in the AWD1111 class. They were required to have a header section, have a main section, and have a footer. They were required to put those in. All right? You know what they are, and I didn't require that with you guys right away, but I wrote my own test last year, and this year I asked Evan, he gave me his, and I just made some upgrades on his test. All right, I kind of like the way his was better than mine. But there shouldn't be anything that's in here. We've got a header. What's in the header? Well, you know, all they did was previously we had that image in here, right? And now we put it in the header tag. That's all that's different. And then everything else is within the main. All right? So there's nothing else new that's in here. This is all the same stuff we had before. But the key thing is, up higher, is linking in that spreadsheet, right? That cascading style sheet. Now they use a class, CSS class of validator. See that? You can see it in the yellow. We've already done that. We called ours error. Okay. They'll also have a class in here that's called entry. And that's for anything those are for the text boxes where you have to actually input. Okay, so they've got some control over the size, over the text type, font type, whatever. All right, so here is the style sheet. Take a quick look at that. We'll kind of peruse our way through it. It's on page 83 in your book as well. But there shouldn't be anything that's in there that you don't understand. Okay? One thing, if you may or may not remember this from last semester, all right. This is my artist's rendition of a table. All right. You may or may not remember this from last semester, okay? And that is, because this is one of those few things that confuses people. First of all, I think I told you that Colin is in that first year class, and he couldn't remember the Margin 0 auto this morning, and they had to center things, and he doesn't have a book. So I found a PDF of an earlier version of the book, and he's looking through it and he can't find it. All right. And well, he supposedly it's on order, and they told him it's going to be in by the weekend, even with the holiday. So we'll see. But what I'm getting to is this: if I have the number in here, 1, doesn't mean anything. So again, it looks like this. Okay, and I change it so it now looks like this. Everybody understand what I'm saying? That's padding. So padding is within the element itself. On the other hand, if I've got this, like this, and I change it so that now it looks like this, and I can only show part of it, so now that 1 is in here, but I've got a bigger area in between each one, that's margin. All right? And if that still confuses you, just look up padding versus margin CSS. That wasn't the greatest explanation, but I just wanted you to at least hear that. There shouldn't be anything that's in this CSS here that you haven't looked at before. Remember, dot means class, # means ID. All right? And what does every single control have to have? What is one of the two things? Not run at equals server, but what's the other one? Every single ASP.NET control has to have an ID. That's what it is. All right. All right, so they talk then about how to code HTML elements. Okay? This is all stuff that we've had before. Again, look familiar? This is meant to be review, relearning, not learning. This is all stuff that you should understand. Comments. Then they get into the HTML5, the newer stuff, which is the semantic stuff. Again, I'm not saying you've used all those extensively. You've done a lot of work maybe, or maybe you haven't with the sides. But from last semester, I know everybody in this room, you all built websites that had a header, that had a footer, that had a section in them, that had a nav in there, and that used figures. All right? So there shouldn't be anything that's in there that you see on that screen that's a surprise. Okay? They give you an example right here, and they show you what it looks like, etc. All right. Again, my hope is that everybody understands the difference between a div and a span. Do you remember this from last year? I'm asking. Do you remember the difference between those two things? That if I put in a paragraph tag and I put some text in, how I automatically get the blank line after it, correct? Because it's a block. Typically there'll be like a blank line before it, a blank line after it. With inline, there isn't. An inline tag is like a bold tag or a strong tag. All right, why am I telling you this? Because these use divs, these use spans. Okay? That's what they talk about in this whole big section here on how to use div and span elements. They explain, again, div, a block element, span, an inline element. They show span examples in here, quite a few of them. And they mention that before HTML5, everything was basically done inside of divs. The funny thing is, the people who wrote the people who wrote Bootstrap, Bootstrap, they still use divs all over the place. All right, you find divs everywhere in Bootstrap. All right, how to provide styles for a page. All right, external, embedded, and inline. All right. Talked about those before. I don't think there's anything new in there. This is one thing you may or may not want to take a quick look at to see how much you remember. All right, CSS selectors. Again, you should be able to look at all of that and know that the first one will be by default everything in the body, the second one everything in main, the third one every paragraph. You should know that when you have these selectors, which are what these are called, the thing before the curly brace, that's either an HTML element, or it's an ID, or it's a class. All right. Again, that should be all stuff that hopefully is relearning from last year. It's all in the book here too. All right. You should understand, looking at any one of these rule sets, there shouldn't be anything in there that surprises you. I think I mentioned this before. Hopefully I did, but if I did not, what we're going to concentrate on is responsive design as much as possible. I don't want you to use pixels, PX. I don't want you to use points, PTs. I want you to use M's, as they show here, or percentages, because M's and percentages are relative, so they'll base themselves, for lack of better words, based on the type of medium you're using. All right, so they'll reapportion themselves, and they'll look a little different if you're on a phone as opposed to a desktop, as opposed to a laptop, as opposed to a tablet, etc. All right. Again, if you need more, on the bottom of page 95 in the book. All right. How to ensure cross-browser compatibility? Well, it's a good news, bad news thing. Again, we didn't do real much of this last semester, but do you remember media queries? Remember those? Most people hate those with a passion. But before Bootstrap, everything that you did to base on different size machines was all done with media queries. You can still use media queries with Bootstrap, but as you'll see in just a couple of minutes, with Bootstrap, they've got set sizes. All right, it's much easier to do it using Bootstrap. Remember this, the JavaScript shiv? Again, there's another example where everybody, Microsoft says, well, it's my ball. If you don't like it, I'm going to take it and go home, type of an idea. So everybody has to appease Microsoft. That shiv is for old versions of IE. And it says basically, if you have any HTML5 element that you don't understand, just, if it's a regular, any kind of element, treat it like it would be a text field. Okay. I don't know if you've ever noticed this or not. I have. It's funny. I talked to one of the students, Matthew, one of the first year students, a very nice young man. But I keep trying to tell him, because he's got IE on his machine. Oh yeah, you're right, Jeff. I've got to download Chrome. Yes, you do. Because he brings them up, and you can so tell the difference, sometimes at least, with things you do in IE. All right. I'm not going to show you, but I think I showed you a year or two ago. I built a bunch of a very simple website that was on Rankin. It was on the different programs that were in Rankin. The different classes that you take in the program here at Rankin. And the last page is what I put on there was a pretty extensive form where somebody, it had everything. It had drop downs, it had check boxes, it had radio buttons. If you bring that thing up in Chrome, it looks great. If you bring it up in Firefox, it looks great. If you bring it up in IE, it looks terrible. And it's the same exact thing. So that shiv that they talk about, that's what that's for. All right. The other thing, just so you see this, and this is again meant to just be a little bit of review for you. One of the neatest sites that's out there is caniuse.com. And what that site does is I can put in, well, I want to be able to use something, whatever it happens to be. Okay? I can put something in here and search for it. So can I use? As an example, I don't know. Can I use SVG? That's a stupid example, but And it shows you what's supported and what's not supported in every browser. All right, that wasn't a great example because that's supported in everything. All right, but if I looked at, for example, how about the tel tag? Notice in here, Opera Mini. Okay, it looks like it's got, I don't know what it might be the problem, but okay. But you can put any tag or anything in there you want, hit the enter key, and it'll tell you what browsers support it. Green is good, as you probably guess. All right. It says here the URL for downloading the normalized CSS style sheet. Normalized.css is a style sheet that makes minor adjustments to browser defaults so all browsers render HTML elements the same way. There's also reset.css, which basically turns off all margins, all padding, all everything. All right, so you're always starting with a clean slate. They talk about cross-browser compatibility. I would just tell you this is my opinion. For whatever it is or is not worth, it's never going to be possible. As long as there are different browsers made by different companies, there will be some differences. There just will. Okay. All right, Visual Studio. Talked a little bit about this yesterday. Okay. So they give an example here. It's not like this is a big thing, but if you come in here and you literally type this, a less than sign and the letter L, and you hit tab twice, it fills that in for you. It's called the code snippet. Okay? There are certain things that are used so often that Microsoft, in their infinite wisdom, tried, and it's a good thing. They tried to set up these snippets so there'd be less stuff that you have to type in. Another thing, they call it the smart indent feature. Notice what this does. It may not sound like a big thing, but if you're in the header here and you hit the enter key, it automatically puts a blank line there, which is just kind of a nice feature. I don't know if you've ever done that, but you know, like with a lot of them, it doesn't do that. It does it in Visual Studio. If you, from last semester, I don't think it, you have to tell me if it did or not. I don't think it did that in brackets. I think you have to manually do it. And I know in Notepad++, you have to manually do that. Just a little nicety. Not that it's that big a thing one way or the other. And then it has in here just a couple other Visual Studio things. Maybe you noticed this, maybe you didn't. Let's say that I put an H1 tag in. Okay? So I put in an H1 tag. It automatically puts the ending H1 tag in for me in Visual Studio, correct? It does. So let's say I don't want an H1 tag. I meant that to be a button. So I changed the beginning tag from H1 to button. The ending tag automatically changes. It's just kind of a nice feature, you know. All right. If you enter the opening bracket followed by letters, all right, for a control. So notice what you do. If you put in this, a less than sign CB, it's going to bring that up. It's going to bring up checkbox for you. So then you can just hit tab and have it fill it out for you. You know all about the IntelliSense, and we've talked about that before. All right. They give you a couple pages here where they talk about accessibility, making your web page available and accessible to all. I will tell you, if I was actually working for Muroc, I would never use that word. You can get sued over using that word today, the word disabled. All right? Most books have changed that to challenged. All right? I mean, we live, let's face it, like it or not, we live in a politically correct world. They talk about WAI, ARIA standards. You're going to see that stuff. You're going to see that when we get into Bootstrap, there are certain times that when you put in certain controls, you should say role equals, ROLE, like, you know, your role in a play type of thing. And when you use role equals, you're using it for people who have like devices for the blind. Okay. There, I guess I should have went right there. There you go. role equals. All right. I love that. Types of disabilities. Well, there's a lot of different types of disabilities. All right. I think I've told you before, my older brother is colorblind. And by many standards, he's considered disabled. All right. If you want more, you can always go out and take a look in here. This is kind of a neat site if you've never looked at this webaim.org. So if you want to learn more about disabilities, there are sites out there too. There's one, I'm sure this isn't what it's called, but it's something like bobby.com that somebody created where you can take your site, your entire website, put it on there, and it'll go through it, and it'll say, well, Valerie, you really should have put a role attribute right here. So it'll go through everything, and it'll just tell you where you could put things so that people who are challenged, you could make it easier for them to use your site. All right, how to create and edit an external style sheet. You know how to do that already. All right, but notice again, there's full IntelliSense support. Okay, there's full IntelliSense support here. All right, there it is again. There's that four-letter word, Bootstrap. All right. Now this chapter, whether you realize it or not, this is very tame. Chapter 10 has got a lot more in it. They're giving you enough Bootstrap in this chapter to get you started. Okay? So they talk about responsiveness, responsive web design, mobile-friendly design. The main way over the last few years that website design has changed is it's not just mobile-friendly, but most places will tell you that when they design sites, they do what's called mobile first. So they build first for the smallest device because it's always easier to expand than it is to contract. Again, they mention media queries, and they say that most people struggle with media queries and they're time consuming, so they've created frameworks. Bootstrap is an example of one of those frameworks. All right. So they show you, I already mentioned it to you, there's 3 different pictures of this app. Notice here, this is, and again, remember that these are not tables. So there's just 2 different lines here. So this would be how this would show on a desktop or laptop. Here is how it would show on a tablet. What's the big difference? Notice that each thing is on its own line. All right. And this is how it would show on a phone. But it scales. Okay. One of the first things that you're going to see in here is when you have an image, and I think it's the width. If you set the width of an image to 100%, it'll automatically scale based on the type of media you're using. So as if you've got a really huge one, when you make your screen size smaller, it'll shrink proportionally. All right. We'll look at some of that stuff as we go on. All right. Again, you can use Bootstrap to implement responsive web design. Bootstrap uses CSS and JavaScript to adjust the layout of your web page. So, how to add it? Hopefully this is stuff that you remember from before, but this is new. You can add it through Nuget. So, if you look up on your screen here, this is, I'm sorry, I've got 2 copies. This is the one we just did. Remember this? We just did it right before the break. All right. If I come back in here, and I again, move down, and I right mouse click on the name of the project, again go down to Nuget Package Manager. I want you to please look on the screen right here on the right. Would you agree we have a thing here that says, you can't see it now, but would you agree that we have a thing here that says scripts and there's a bunch of jQuery in it? Would everybody agree with that? Okay. Now, we're going to come back in here and I'm going to do it all over again. So again, right mouse click, manage Nuget packages like we did before. Click browse. All right, I've got to remember the name because I'm sure I've forgotten it already. But we want to, we want to search for says select Bootstrap from the packages that appear. All right, so I'm going to click Browse, like we already did. And do I see Bootstrap in there? It probably is in there. I'm wondering if I just type in Bootstrap, if it'll find it. And typically it doesn't, because it's looking for something that starts with the word Bootstrap. And the Bootstrap package doesn't start with the word Bootstrap. So the search feature in here isn't that great. Oh, I guess it did bring it up. So there's Bootstrap. All right, and I think the one you want is Bootstrap and not Twitter Bootstrap. If you said to me, what's the difference? Well, look, Bootstrap, it's got version 4 beta. Twitter Bootstrap, it's got version 3. All right, but I'm gonna go and grab 4 here, and I'm gonna click Install. Now watch over on the side when it gets done, and I click OK. All right, let me close that. And it should have, at least, I don't know if it did or not, but it should have come in and added a bunch of stuff in here. I don't see it. Let's go back and try it the other way. So let's right mouse click again. Nuget packages. Type in Bootstrap in here again. Try that one, see what happens. There. Did you see it? All right. It added a content directory, which has got all the Bootstrap themes in it. It added some stuff, if it needed to the scripts directory. It added fonts, which has your glyphicons. So what, in the key things that are in here, just so you know, are under content, bootstrap.min.css. You're going to have to basically add that, okay? You want to add that before any other CSS files. Did you hear me? That should always be the first CSS file that you link. Because if you put that after your own CSS file, if you put it afterwards, it probably would overwrite some of the stuff that you did. Okay? Now, notice there's bootstrap.css and bootstrap.min.css. Not a joke. What's the difference between them? Which means what?
No space.
There's no spaces. So if we bring up the Bootstrap CSS file, there it is, and we look through it, it is about 7,100 lines, correct? Okay, if we bring up the other one, it's 9 lines. It's all in there, but all the white space has been removed. But typically the reason that you want to bring in the minified version is it loads faster. And if you've got a website with a lot of intricate graphics and stuff, it may matter. If you don't know this, they've done studies. Most people will wait up to 10 seconds for a site to load, and if it doesn't, they think something's wrong, and they get out. That's just human nature. All right. Also, if we go and look under scripts, the first JS file that you put in there is your jQuery file. And again, we can use the minified one. So here would be jQuery-3.1.1.min.js. After that, you put in bootstrap.min.js. And please listen to this. There's a bootstrap.min.js and there's a bootstrap.min.css. They're different files. I've had that happen before. Somebody puts in one and not the other. Why isn't my stuff working? Because you put the bootstrap.min.css as the first thing in your CSS files up in the head. Most people load all their JavaScript stuff right at the bottom of the body. And the first one that you put in is jQuery. The second one that you put in is bootstrap.min.js. That makes sense to everyone? All right. And I'm not sure why that 4 didn't load anything. I really don't know. So. And what I just mentioned is what they talk about here. Okay. All right. The classes of the Bootstrap grid system. Bootstrap goes on how many columns? Is it based off of? 12. That means that you can have 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 12 times, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 6 times, 3, 3, 3, 3, 4 times, 4, 4, 4, 3 times, 6 and 6 2 times, 12 once, 7 and 5, whatever you do, but they should all equal 12. What if I set up 3 columns? I'm asking you, guess if you don't know. What if I set up 3 columns and I say, okay, this one's got 6, this one's got 6, and this one's got 1. First of all, what's 6 plus 6 plus 1? Okay, so what happens to that last column? It gets pushed down to the next line. Most people don't realize that until they try it and then they see it. All right. All right. Also, there's 2 different ways, and I'm going to show you over here. There's a difference between these 2 things, container and container fluid. If you do container, all right, then what Bootstrap tries to do with your website is it tries to give you some margin on both sides. Did you hear me? It tries to give you some margin on both sides. If you say container fluid, it tries to use 100% of your screen. So, hand goes up. So which one do I use? It depends on what effect you're going for. If you're trying to utilize 100% of your screen, you use fluid. Otherwise, you just use container. Okay? All right. Inside, so you basically have a div, and that div will have an ID of container. All right? Then you'll have divs inside of there that'll have an ID of row. So for each row that you're putting in, and each one of those rows has to have stuff that adds up to 12. All right? This is the key thing right here too. If you look on the screen, it's in your book. I'm on page 109 in your book. All right? Screen valid sizes. If you say LG in Bootstrap, that means, all right, 1200 pixels and above. That makes sense? Now there is an XL, I believe, that now is in for Bootstrap 4. Something tells me it's 1992 pixels, but it could be a different value. I don't know. All right. Then you've got MD. MD means that it goes from, it says 992 until 1199. Does that make sense? Butts up right against the previous one. Then you've got small, and that's 768 to 991. Then you've got extra small, which is 0, which doesn't make sense, but 0 basically to 767. Does all that make sense? Those are the predefined sizes. Those are the ones you should use. You shouldn't go overwriting that stuff. If you're using Bootstrap and then you create your own CSS file, which you can do, and you can override things in Bootstrap that you don't like. One thing you shouldn't override are these numbers. Because you could make your own media queries and you could say, well, as far as I'm concerned, large is anything over 768. You could do that, but that might screw up the Bootstrap stuff that you actually have in your site. There are also things that are called offsets. All right, it says an element that has moved one column to the right on large screens. So you can use offsets. We're not going to worry about that right now. Okay? Now, if you do, hopefully you remember this. If you look on the screen right here, col MD4. This element spans 4 columns. Okay, what's MD? That's 992, correct? Would you also agree that we don't have anything in that particular line other than MD4? Would everybody agree with that? So that's saying that if your screen size is 992 pixels or above, have it be 4 columns, okay? If it's less than 992, have it be 1 column. Stuff stacks, okay? And that's, again, I'm not going to go back, but in your book, when we looked at the picture and we looked at how the picture would appear on your phone and how everything's stacked, that's what we're talking about here. And you can combine these, okay? You can say, for example, here, this says this column is supposed to be 4 on a medium device, which means 992 to 1199, but only 3 if it's over 1199. Does that make sense? The best way to learn this is to sit and play with it. It really and truly is. All right. How the Bootstrap grid system works. I love this because literally they give it 2 pages. And they act like in 2 pages they're going to be able to explain to you how the grid system works. Okay? Hopefully you remember this, and I think I showed you this the other day, but I'm going to show it again anyway. And that is that now if we go out to getbootstrap.com, it looks much different than the way it looked. But this is one of the best help systems I have ever seen for a software product. All right. Let's see if I can find that. I was going to. There's something else on here I want to show you because it'll actually, I think at least, this will help you. And those of you who write stuff down, you might want to write this down. So give me a second here. I think it's in this folder. Let's make sure this is the right file. Okay, I probably have told you about this before, but there is a guy that I have taken several courses from online from udemy.com. His name is Brad Traversy. Okay, I don't want to do that here. Cut it. And what he has done is he has taken a class that I took with him that was on Bootstrap 3 and updated or upgraded it to Bootstrap 4. Okay, you're like, well, big deal. Why do I care? Well, what he has done is he has created what's called this Bootstrap Starter Kit. And this is for a class that he teaches online. But this is so cool. He wrote all this himself in HTML. So if you want to learn, for example, about how the nav bar works, all right, you want to look at different things, he's got what he calls a starter kit. And if you're interested in looking at it, you may or may not be, but I just thought I'd bring it up so you could see it. There's where it is. Okay. I will tell you that if you say, I'm not asking, but if I asked right here, if I said, okay, there's 7 of you in here, how many of you, if you had your choice, would rather be web designers and developers as opposed to programmers? Where you do C# all day long, or you just do Java, and let's say half the hands went up. All right? You better know Bootstrap. And what I mean is, if you at least have a fundamental understanding of it, that's a start. But I will tell you that if you're going to be a web designer, you'll have to know Bootstrap, because virtually all websites that are being created today have a Bootstrap component in them. Okay. All right. This isn't going to teach you everything, not at all. It's going to show you some more stuff. Still, the best resource is getbootstrap.com. So they go through some examples. This is confusing. I went back and reread this yesterday. Okay? And if you look at what's on the screen right here, the author wrote this. So these 2 things right here, these are in divs. There's no formatting on them whatsoever, which means these should always take up 100% of the screen. All right? You go, so they look the same here, and they look the same here. Okay? This is not set up like this, and neither is that. So let's just take a look at the code that goes along with them. So the first one's just ifs. The second one, notice what this says. It says, for medium devices and above, this first column should take 4, and the second column should take 8. Does that make sense? But when it's smaller, you'll notice how it stacks. So if it's less than a medium device, they'll just stack on top of one another. All right? And then the last one says, well, look, we got 2 of them in here. We've got 4 and 6, and 8 and 6. So what does that mean? Well, the first one that's got 4 and 6, it actually isn't using those last two columns that are over there. But notice once it gets small enough, it looks the same. All right. The best thing I can tell you about this, we are going to spend a little bit of time today in looking at the example they have here in Chapter 3, but you should really take a couple minutes and go take a look at it yourselves. I mean, I think you learn by doing it yourself, trying stuff, removing stuff, adding other stuff, and seeing what happens. Bootstrap also has support for forms. The key thing with forms, if you look right here, is by default, so if you look right here, notice how over here it says form, class, form equal horizontal. And this one's vertical, it doesn't say vertical. That's because vertical is the default. So by default, it puts each thing on its own line. So if you don't want this kind of setup, you want this kind, you have to tell Bootstrap that you want a horizontal layout. Does that make sense? So it does it this way by default. If you want it this way, all right, so it does it vertical by default. If you want it horizontal, you have to tell it. And that's what the author is saying in here. All right, how to work with the Bootstrap CSS classes and other elements. This is one thing that some people don't like about it. So in other words, let's assume that I'm gonna create a button, and I want that button. Okay, I'm gonna actually just put this on the board here. So I'm gonna create a button, and I want the button to be green, which is really called a success button. So I'm gonna say, I'm gonna set up my button, and I'm gonna say class equal btn success. I have to put in both those classes. That's adding two Bootstrap classes. The btn, which has got the common nature for all buttons, and this, which is going to give it the green. It's going to mean it's a success button. Sometimes you're going to see 2, 3, 4, 5 different classes for some of these elements. You need all that stuff. All right, you may remember the other day when I showed you the nav bar, and we had like nav bar, then nav bar inverse, and then nav bar top, something like that. All right. So what Bootstrap is, more than anything else, is it's a collection of CSS classes. All right. And I think how somebody becomes proficient with Bootstrap is they read the help system again and again and again, practice with it, and then know when they have a problem just where to go on the help system to find out what the answer is. There is a W3 Schools tutorial on Bootstrap, but it's a Bootstrap 3 tutorial. All right, and some of it's a little antiquated, just so you know I've gone through it before.
You should use I think you should teach the other class like a Bootstrap book or something.
You know what? Most of the Bootstrap books, they're not good.
Really?
Yeah, I used a Bootstrap book, and at the time, the one that was rated the best, and all the students told me was that this is just confusing as hell.
It'd be good if it just started out.
Yeah. What we're going to do is we're going to spend 2 weeks, and we're just going to create a whole site from scratch using Bootstrap. Okay, that's the idea. And I told Evan I'm not doing that PSD stuff anymore.
Yeah, that wasn't.
He is, but I'm not. Yeah. All right, images. You can, they've got it. I don't know if they. I guess they don't show examples, but you can round them, etc. This is the Bootstrap thing. That's like saying that image where I said width 100%. If you say image responsive, the image will automatically adjust. So that let's assume for a second that Muroc image that we had with the logo was big, fairly big. Okay. Well, if it was fairly big and you're putting it on a phone, you wouldn't want it to be fairly big. You'd want it to be responsive. So it's image-responsive. The Jumbotron, hopefully you remember the Jumbotron, this thing here. All right. And they give you some examples of stuff that you can use. Okay. All right, then let's look at this, because this is the last 8 or so pages. Tell you what, I don't know, I'll go till about 3:20, then we'll take another break.
What's the .hero thing?
The what?
What do they call it, hero or something?
I don't know. Oh, I think I believe what it is that for version 4, I think what Hero is they have a new font that has been put in there. I think that's the Hero. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's more rounded looking. It actually looks more artistic, for lack of better words.
But it's basically a jumbotron too, or something.
No, it's font that you typically put in stuff like
Okay,
Jumbotron.
okay, never mind.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So the rest of the chapter, starting on page 116, gives this bootstrap version of the future value application. So the first thing to look at is the ASPX code. Now, I said this before, but I'm saying it again. That's how important it is. Look, bootstrap min.css comes before your version. jQuery comes before jQuery's.js comes before Bootstrap.js, and if you had your own, it would come after that. Some books, believe me, you can get IT people to fight about anything. You really can. And I've read articles. Some people say that these script tags should only be put down at the very bottom, right before the body. And the reason for that is that if you put them at the very bottom, since the head loads first, you're sure that everything that's up in the head has been loaded before that stuff loads. All right, that's their rationale. Other people say it doesn't matter. Put them up here. But the order does matter. Okay? Again, notice, div, class equal container. There's the div. There's the beginning of it. Where does it end? Down at the very bottom, right? So that's not main, but it's kind of like main that we looked at for HTML5 tag. It's not, but it's sort of the same thing. Okay? Anything that you want in that major container goes in your div ID equal container. The next, all right, header, class equal Jumbotron. Well, you should be able to look at this because what they're doing now is they're bootstrapping what they did earlier. Image ID equal logo, all right? And you'll notice if you look in here, well, they didn't do anything with, there it is. Class equals rounded and responsive. Does that matter? Do they show it here? I don't remember. Nope. So it's backwards. Can you tell now that the Muroc logo has got rounded corners? Okay. The image itself doesn't have those. All right. The way that they got those was the image rounded. And the responsive says that the size of the image should grow or shrink depending on your screen size. Okay. When you work with forms, notice they want a horizontal form. They want it to look like we had before. Label, text box, label, text box, label, 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 label. All right? By default, you're not going to get that, so you have to say form horizontal. That's why they did that. Basically, everything that you put inside of a form, directly or indirectly, is going to be in a class called form group, just so you know that. And you'll notice that everything they put in here, all the individual stuff, okay? So basically, what's the equivalent of each row that we had is in its own div. All right? And they've done sizing with it too. And there's it actually is a pretty good explanation on, exactly what's in here on 116, and they show you it, then they finish it up on 118. All right? Then they say, well, if you use bootstrap.min.css, there's a whole boatload of CSS that's set up for you. But you might want to override some of it. So they show you what they override in here. That's all of it. What they've done is they've set the font size, and that looks weird, 250%. All right, but they explain in there, where is it? 250% of the base font size. So take whatever the base, what it typically would be, and make it 2.5 times that size. And how do you know it's that? You play with it. All right, you create a site, you put it in there, and you work with it until it's a size you want it to be. All right, the container, that's that border that they put around everything. And they said the future value stuff, they wanted it to be bolded. Okay. That's it.
Like M's more of a font thing though? M's?
Anything that you do typically will be done with M's. Now, you'll notice in here they've got a 1 pixel. You could do that with M's, but it would be 1 divided by 16, and I don't know what 1/16 is. It would be like 0.006 or something like that, or whatever. You know, so you could do that.
I mean, in regards to fonts, though, like,
No.
usually,
Usually, you're going to see everything in M's. All right. And like I said, I told people even this semester, I want you to start using M's just from day one. All right. Let's do this. Let's take a break. It's 3:20. Let's come back at 3:35, and we'll actually take a look at the program that's in here. Now, I'm asking you, did that help today to do that exercise as a class in Chapter 2? I mean, we don't have the time to do every one, but it's up to you. The next one that you're going to be assigned for Chapter 3 uses Bootstrap. Would it help, considering it's the first Bootstrap one? Do you want to do that one next week as a class? I'll tell you what, look at it between now and Tuesday. I'll have it done, and if you want to do it as a class, we can do it as a class. If you're like, no, we'll just do it ourselves, that's more than fine. All right, come back at 3:35, please.